In 1978, a Soviet engineer named Viktor walked into a state store in central Moscow. He had 120 rubles in his pocket, nearly 2 months' salary. He wanted one thing: a pair of jeans. Not Soviet-made jeans. Not the stiff, scratchy, ill-fitting denim that the state factories produced. Real jeans. American jeans. Levi's. Lee. Wranglers. Because in the entire Soviet Union, a country of 280 million people, you could not buy a pair of Western jeans in any store. Not for any price. This isn't a story about jeans, or rather, it is. But it's also a story about how an entire system of life was built on the idea that what you wanted didn't matter, that your desires were by definition wrong, because the state had already decided what you needed. And jeans, simple, everyday, denim jeans, became the single most powerful symbol of everything the Soviet system could not provide. They weren't just clothing, they were freedom you could wear. Today we're going to show you exactly how this happened, why the Soviet Union, a superpower that built nuclear submarines and launched satellites, could not produce a pair of pants that anyone actually wanted to wear, and how a simple piece of clothing helped bring down an empire. Let's start with the factory floor. The Soviet Union produced denim. Technically, the state had textile factories in Ivanovo, once called the Manchester of Russia, that churned out millions of meters of fabric every year. But Soviet denim was not denim. It was a heavy, coarse cotton blend. The dye was inconsistent, one wash, and it faded to a sickly gray-green. The cut was standardized across all sizes, which meant it fit nobody properly. The fabric tore at the knees within weeks. Now compare that with what an American teenager could buy at any mall in 1975. Levi's 501s, shrink to fit, copper rivets, indigo dye that faded beautifully over time, a pair of jeans that got better with age. The Soviet system didn't understand this. Why would anyone pay more for foreign pants when the state factory produced perfectly adequate work trousers? The concept of fashion, of wanting something not because it functioned better, but because of how it made you feel, that was bourgeois. That was Western decadence. So what did Soviet citizens do? They built an underground economy that was in some ways more efficient than the official one. Foreign students, diplomats, sailors, anyone who could travel west became smugglers. A pair of Levi's bought in New York for $15 could be sold in Moscow for 150 rubles. That was more than a month's salary for a factory worker. Jeans became currency, literally. You could pay a plumber in jeans. You could bribe a hospital administrator with jeans. In some Soviet cities, a pair of Wranglers could get you an apartment faster than any official waiting list. The KGB knew about this. They arrested traders. They confiscated shipments. But the demand was so overwhelming that the black market couldn't be stopped. When 280 million people want something, and the only way to get it is illegally, you don't stop that with police raids. By the 1980s, something had shifted. Jeans were no longer just clothing. They had become a uniform. Every Soviet rock concert, the unofficial ones in basements and garages, was a sea of denim. Every underground artist, every dissident poet, every teenager who secretly listened to Beatles records smuggled from the West, they all wore jeans. Jeans said, "I am not a Soviet worker. I am not a cog in the machine. I am an individual. I see the world beyond these borders, and I refuse to pretend that what the state gives me is enough." The Soviet government's response? They tried to co-opt denim. State factories began producing jeans with Western-sounding names: Montana, Texas, Missouri, in a desperate attempt to give citizens the feeling of Western fashion without the actual Western fashion. They looked terrible. Everyone knew they were fake. And wearing them marked you as someone who wanted Western jeans but couldn't get them, which was somehow worse than not wearing jeans at all. But here's the part people often forget. Not everyone in the Soviet Union wore jeans, because not everyone could get them. So many settled for the next best thing. Corduroy trousers. They weren't Western, they weren't rebellious, and they definitely weren't Levi's. but they were acceptable. Corduroy was easier to produce, easier to justify, and crucially, easier to buy. In a system where denim symbolized defiance, corduroy symbolized compromise. To a Soviet planner, corduroy made sense. Durable, warm, practical. To a Soviet citizen, it was something else entirely. It looked modern. It felt different from the stiff, lifeless fabrics the state usually offered. And if you squinted hard enough, it almost felt Western. Students wore corduroys, young engineers, members of the intelligentsia, people who wanted to look like they belonged to the modern world, even if they were still trapped inside the old one. Many had them custom-made. Private tailors adjusted the cut, narrowed the legs, dyed the fabric darker. Anything to push it one step closer to what they'd seen in foreign films or smuggled magazines. Corduroys weren't a statement of rebellion. They were a quiet act of adaptation. They said, I know what I'm missing, and I'm doing the best I can with what I'm allowed to have. For many people, corduroy trousers became everyday life, worn to lectures, to work, on dates. They didn't carry the myth of jeans, but they carried something else, normality. And that's the irony. Jeans were the dream, the symbol, the forbidden object. Corduroys were reality. Today, some people who grew up behind the Iron Curtain feel more nostalgia for corduroy than for denim. Because jeans were always just out of reach. Corduroy was what you actually lived in. And even that small detail tells you something important. Even when the system controlled factories, borders, and desire itself, people still search for style, for individuality, even if it came in thick, ribbed fabric. There was a word in Soviet Russian that doesn't translate cleanly into English. Farzhovshchik, Farzhovshchik. It meant a black market dealer, someone who sold foreign goods illegally. Being a Farzhovshchik was a criminal offense, punishable by up to 7 years in a labor camp. And yet, thousands of Soviet citizens chose this life because the alternative was standing in line for 6 hours to buy a pair of Soviet jeans that would fall apart in a month. The math was simple. Risk prison, wear Levi's, follow the rules, wear garbage. And this right here was the fatal flaw of the Soviet system laid bare. Not in geopolitics, not in military strategy, but in a pair of pants. When a government cannot provide its citizens with something as basic as decent clothing, and then criminalizes their attempts to get it elsewhere, that government has a problem no 5-year plan can solve. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I am, and you want to see more hidden histories from behind the Iron Curtain, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. Here's something most people don't know. Jeans became a diplomatic tool. When American diplomats traveled to Moscow, they didn't just bring briefcases and briefing papers. They brought suitcases full of jeans. Not as official gifts, that would be a diplomatic incident, but as personal items that somehow found their way into the hands of Soviet contacts. The US government understood something the Soviet Politburo refused to admit, that soft power, the power of culture, of desire, of aspiration, was more dangerous than any missile. A Soviet citizen who tasted Western freedom through a pair of jeans was a citizen who would never fully trust the system again. In 1987, when Gorbachev finally allowed limited foreign imports as part of Perestroika, one of the first Western companies to enter the Soviet market was Levi Strauss & Company. They opened a store in Moscow. The lines stretched around the block. People wept. Grown adults cried over denim, because it wasn't about the fabric. It was about what the fabric represented. The wall was coming down. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. The reasons were many: economic failure, political stagnation, ethnic nationalism. But among those reasons, historians sometimes mention something unexpected. Blue jeans, not as a primary cause, but as a symptom, as proof that a system that cannot fulfill the simplest human desires, not grand desires, not luxury, just decent clothes that fit well and look good, that system has lost touch with reality. Today you can buy Levi's in Moscow, Kyiv, Tbilisi, Almaty, in shopping malls that look just like the ones in Ohio. The jeans are the same. The people wearing them are the same. The desire that burned inside them, to be seen, to be individual, to be free, that was always the same. The Soviet Union just refused to see it. Victor never got his Levi's, not in that store, not in 1978. But a decade later, after the wall fell, after the stores filled with colors he'd never seen on shelves before, he walked into a shop in Moscow and bought a pair of 501s. He was 52 years old. He cried in the store. And when someone asked him why, he said, "Because I waited my whole life for this." Next week, we're going to show you something even more shocking: how the Soviet Union fed 280 million people without a single supermarket. That story will change everything you think you know about life behind the Iron Curtain. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video.